Hi everyone, welcome back to Mr. Sleepy Crime. I know many of you enjoy listening to these videos as you fall asleep. So before you drift off, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from, and if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Alright, now let's get comfortable, relax, and dive into tonight's stories. Story 1. I want to tell you about Sarah Chen, though I never had the privilege of meeting her while she was alive. I've come to know her through the dozens of people whose lives she touched during her brief time in the coastal town of Mendocino, California. Through their memories, Sarah has become as real to me as any person I've sat across from at a dinner table. This isn't just another missing person case filed away in some detective's cabinet. This is the story of a young woman who came to a small town to study the ocean and instead stumbled into something that would cost her everything. It's about the way secrets can grow like barnacles on a ship's hull, hidden beneath the surface until they threaten to sink everything above. Sarah disappeared on October 15, 2019, but her story began long before that autumn day when the fog rolled in thicker than usual and never seemed to lift. To understand what happened to her, we need to go back to the beginning, to a spring morning in 2018 when a rental car with Sacramento plates pulled up to a weathered Victorian cottage on Little Lake Road. I've walked that road myself many times since then, trying to see it through Sarah's eyes that first day. The cottage sits behind a white picket fence that's seen better decades, surrounded by towering redwoods that make even sunny days feel like twilight. There's a peace there, the kind of quiet that city folks like Sarah pay good money to find. But as you'll learn, peace can be deceptive in small towns where everyone knows everyone else's business, or thinks they do. Sarah Chen was 28 when she first laid eyes on that cottage, though she looked younger with her long black hair usually pulled back in a practical ponytail and her face free of makeup except for the sunscreen she applied religiously every morning. She had the kind of quiet beauty that grew on you, not the type to turn heads on a busy street, but the kind that made you want to know what she was thinking about when she got that faraway look in her eyes. She'd grown up in Sacramento, the daughter of Thomas and Linda Chen. Thomas was a high school math teacher who'd emigrated from Taiwan in the 1980s, and Linda was a librarian whose family had been in California for 3 generations. They'd raised Sarah to value education above all else, which is how she ended up with a master's degree in marine biology from UC Berkeley and a research grant that would change her life in ways none of them could have imagined. The cottage on Little Lake Road had been advertised in the University Housing Bulletin, quiet retreat for serious researcher. Victorian charm, walking distance to coast. $1,200 per month including utilities. Sarah had called the number that same afternoon, speaking with Robert Martinez, the landlord who'd inherited the property from his grandmother. Robert told me later that Sarah's voice on the phone was what convinced him to rent to her sight unseen. She sounded like someone who understood the value of solitude, he said, leaning against his truck in the driveway of the cottage nearly 2 years after Sarah's disappearance. Robert is the kind of man who measures his words carefully, each one carrying the weight of experience. He's lived in Mendocino his entire 54 years, making his living as a carpenter and handyman, watching the town change as wealthy city folks bought up the Victorian homes as weekend retreats. Sarah wasn't like that, he continued, his weathered hands gesturing toward the cottage. She didn't come here to play at being a local. She came here to work, to understand something about the ocean that the rest of us take for granted. The cottage itself tells a story of a different era. Built in 1892 by a lumber baron named Silas Whitmore, no relation to Sarah's research advisor, just one of those coincidences that seem meaningful when you're trying to make sense of a mystery. The house has 11-foot ceilings, original hardwood floors that creak a symphony when you walk across them, and windows that rattle when the Pacific wind picks up in the afternoon. Sarah's first week in Mendocino established the routine she would follow for the next 18 months. She was an early riser, up by 5:30 a.m. every day, rain or shine. Margaret Holloway, who owns the village store on Lansing Street, remembers seeing Sarah's lights on in the cottage when Margaret opened her shop at 6 a.m. That girl was dedicated, I'll give her that, Margaret told me, wiping down the counter that had seen thousands of conversations over the years. Margaret is 73, with silver hair that she wears in the same style she's had for 40 years and eyes that don't miss much. She's been the unofficial keeper of Mendocino's daily dramas since 1975, when she and her late husband bought the store from the previous owners. Sarah would come in every morning around 7:15, right after I'd finished brewing the first pot of coffee. Large dark roast with oat milk, never varied, not once in all those months. She'd buy a banana or sometimes one of those protein bars, and we'd chat about the weather. That's how conversations start around here, with the weather, but Sarah was different. She'd ask about the tide charts, about whether the old-timers had noticed changes in the water temperature over the years. Sarah's research focused on the decline of red abalone populations along the Mendocino coast, a problem that had been accelerating over the past decade. Abalone are large sea snails that cling to rocks in the intertidal zone, their shells prized by collectors and their meat considered a delicacy. But more importantly, they're indicator species, their health reflects the overall condition of the marine ecosystem. Dr. James Whitmore, Sarah's research advisor at UC Berkeley, had secured the grant that brought her to Mendocino. When I spoke with him in his cluttered office overlooking San Francisco Bay, he described Sarah as one of the most promising graduate students he'd worked with in his 25-year career. She had an intuitive understanding of marine ecosystems that you can't teach, Dr. Whitmore said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he spoke. Most researchers see the data, temperature readings, pH levels, population counts. Sarah saw the story the data was telling. She understood that everything in the ocean is connected, that you can't study one species in isolation. The early months of Sarah's research went smoothly. She established monitoring sites along 12 miles of coastline, from the mouth of the Russian River north to Fort Bragg. 3 days a week, she'd spend hours in tide pools, counting abalone, measuring their shells, taking water samples. The other days were spent at her laptop, analyzing data and corresponding with researchers around the world who were studying similar population declines. By summer 2018, Sarah had become a familiar figure in Mendocino. The town has fewer than 800 year-round residents, the kind of place where newcomers are noticed and evaluated with the careful attention small communities give to anyone who might be sticking around. Sarah passed whatever unspoken tests the locals had for outsiders. She volunteered at the Mendocino Coast Children's Fund summer reading program, helping kids with science projects and teaching them about marine life. Martha Rodriguez, the librarian who ran the program, remembers Sarah's patience with the children, the way she could explain complex concepts in terms they could understand. She brought in shells and sea stars, let the kids touch everything, Martha recalled, her voice soft with memory. There was this one boy, maybe 8 years old, who was fascinated by the hermit crabs Sarah showed him. She spent an hour with him, explaining how they find new shells as they grow, how they have to be brave enough to leave their old home to find a better one. Looking back, that seems almost prophetic. It was at the library that Sarah first met David Crenshaw, though their actual relationship wouldn't begin for several more months. David had come in to use the internet, his fishing boat didn't have Wi-Fi, and cell service was spotty out on the water. He was researching market prices for the salmon he'd caught that week when Sarah approached him. "Excuse me," she'd said, "I couldn't help but notice your catch reports on the table. Are you seeing changes in the fish populations? Different species than usual, or changes in where you're finding them?" David later told me that his first impression of Sarah was that she was one of those college types who think they can learn everything from books. But something about her genuine curiosity made him sit down and talk with her for an hour, sharing observations he'd made during his 15 years of fishing these waters. David Crenshaw is what people in Mendocino call local, not just someone who lives there, but someone whose family has worked these waters for generations. His grandfather had fished the same waters, his father too, until a heart attack took him when David was 19. David inherited the boat, a 32-foot Monterey named Linda Marie after his grandmother, along with the knowledge passed down through 3 generations of fishermen. He's 34 now, tall and lean in the way of men who do physical work for a living. His hands are permanently stained by saltwater and diesel fuel, his face weathered by years of Pacific sun and spray. But his eyes are kind, the pale blue of ocean water on a cloudy day, and when he talks about the sea, his whole demeanor changes. He becomes almost poetic, describing currents and weather patterns with the intimacy of someone who's spent half his life reading the ocean's moods. Sarah and David's friendship developed slowly over the autumn of 2018. She'd sometimes wait at the harbor when his boat came in, eager to hear about what he'd observed during his days on the water. He'd save unusual specimens for her, fish species that seemed out of place, sea stars with unusual colorations, anything that struck him as different from the norm. She listened, David told me, his voice carrying a weight of loss that nearly 3 years hadn't diminished. We were sitting in the harbor cafe where he and Sarah used to meet, watching the fog roll in through the harbor mouth. Most people, when you tell them about the ocean, they nod and smile and think you're just some fisherman spinning tales. Sarah heard what I was saying. She understood that the water was changing, that something was wrong. Their relationship turned romantic sometime in early 2019, though both were careful to keep it quiet. David was in the middle of a difficult divorce from his wife of 8 years, a process that had turned bitter when she'd accused him of caring more about his boat than his marriage. She wasn't entirely wrong. David's love affair with the ocean had begun long before he'd met Jennifer, and it would outlast their marriage by decades. Sarah's own reasons for discretion were more complex. She'd grown up in a family where academic achievement was paramount, where her parents had sacrificed so she could pursue her education. The idea of her research being compromised by gossip about her personal life worried her, even in a town as small as Mendocino. She was old-fashioned that way, Margaret from the village store observed. Sarah kept her professional life and her personal life in separate boxes. But you could tell she was happy. That spring of 2019, she had a lightness about her that hadn't been there before. The relationship between Sarah and David deepened through shared fascination with the ocean's mysteries. He'd take her out on the Linda Marie during calm weather, showing her fishing grounds his family had worked for decades. She'd share her research findings with him, explaining how the data she was collecting painted a picture of an ecosystem under stress. We'd anchor in these little coves that you can't reach from land, David remembered, his eyes focused on something beyond the harbor. Sarah would put on her diving gear and disappear underwater for what felt like hours. When she'd surface, she'd be excited about some discovery, a type of algae she hadn't seen before, or the way certain fish were adapting to the changing water temperature. She saw beauty in things most people would consider unremarkable. By summer 2019, their relationship had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Sarah would spend weekdays focused on her research, and weekends exploring the coast with David. They'd drive the winding roads north of town, hiking to remote beaches where David had played as a child. They'd visit the farmers' market on Saturday mornings, buying vegetables from local growers and cheese from the Anderson Valley. It was an idyllic period, the kind of happiness that feels fragile even while you're living it. Sarah's research was progressing well, her relationship with David was deepening, and she'd found a sense of belonging in Mendocino that she'd never experienced in Sacramento or Berkeley. But underneath this contentment, something else was developing, a discovery that would change everything. The first sign that something was amiss came in July 2019, during what should have been routine data collection at Sarah's monitoring site near the mouth of Brush Creek. She'd been tracking abalone populations at this location for over a year, and the numbers had been declining steadily but predictably, consistent with the regional trend that was the focus of her research. But on July 15, something was different. Sarah arrived at the site just after dawn, as was her habit, carrying her waterproof collection bags and her diving equipment. The tide was at its lowest point of the month, exposing rocks that were usually underwater. What she found there would haunt her for the remaining months of her life. In tide pools that had previously teemed with life, Sarah found a graveyard. Dozens of abalone shells, their former inhabitants dead, their bodies already claimed by scavengers. Sea stars were dying too, their arms curled in the distinctive pattern that indicated exposure to toxins. The water itself had an oily sheen that caught the morning light in unnatural rainbows. Sarah's field notebook from that day, later found by investigators, recorded her observations in the precise, clinical language of science, but her handwriting betrayed her emotional state. The normally neat script became increasingly erratic as she documented the extent of the die-off. "Total mortality event at BS3, she wrote, using her shorthand for the Brush Creek site. Water quality visibly compromised. Strong chemical odor, petroleum-based. Population crash appears recent, shells still articulated, soft tissue removal consistent with post-mortem scavenging rather than natural mortality." Dr. Whitmore told me that when Sarah called him that afternoon, she was more upset than he'd ever heard her. She was crying, he remembered, his usually professorial demeanor softening. Sarah was not someone who cried easily. She'd seen plenty of environmental damage during her studies, but this was different. This was acute, severe, and it was happening in what should have been a pristine environment. Sarah spent the next week returning to the site daily, documenting the progression of the die-off and collecting water samples for analysis. She expanded her survey to other monitoring locations along the coast, finding similar but less severe impacts at 2 other sites. The pattern suggested a source somewhere upstream from Brush Creek, something releasing toxins into the water system that fed the coastal marine environment. The laboratory results from Sarah's water samples arrived 3 weeks later, and they confirmed her worst fears. The water contained elevated levels of heavy metals, chromium, lead, and mercury, along with industrial solvents that had no natural source in the environment. Someone was dumping chemical waste into the watershed, and it was killing the marine life that Sarah had dedicated her career to protecting. This is where Sarah's story intersects with the darker currents of small-town politics and corporate influence. Mendocino County's economy has always depended on its natural resources, first logging, then tourism, with fishing and agriculture filling the gaps. But in recent decades, as environmental regulations tightened and consumer preferences shifted, many of the old industries had struggled to adapt. Redwood Industrial Solutions was one of the companies trying to bridge the gap between old and new California. Founded in 1987 by Marcus Reed, a former lumber executive, the company specialized in processing wood products for export to Asia, where demand for American timber remained strong despite declining domestic markets. Their facility, located 15 miles inland from Mendocino near the town of Ukiah, employed nearly 200 people and was one of the largest private employers in the region. On the surface, Redwood Industrial Solutions appeared to be a responsible corporate citizen. They sponsored Little League teams, donated to local charities, and had received awards from the county for their environmental stewardship programs. Marcus Reed served on the board of the Mendocino Coast Chamber of Commerce and was known for his generous contributions to local political campaigns. But Sarah's investigation revealed a different side of the company. Using public records and Freedom of Information requests, she traced the contamination back to a series of outfall pipes that connected Redwood Industrial Solutions facility to Brush Creek. The pipes were supposed to carry treated wastewater that met strict environmental standards. Instead, they were carrying a toxic cocktail of industrial chemicals directly into the watershed. Sarah's research uncovered a pattern of regulatory violations stretching back nearly 5 years. Redwood Industrial Solutions had been fined repeatedly by state environmental agencies for improper waste disposal, but the fines were small compared to the company's annual profits. It was cheaper to pay the penalties than to properly treat their wastewater, and the company's executives had made a calculated decision to continue polluting. The human cost of this decision extended far beyond the marine life that Sarah studied. Brush Creek supplied drinking water to several small communities downstream from the Redwood Industrial Solutions facility. Children in these communities had elevated levels of heavy metals in their blood. Cancer rates were higher than the state average. But these rural, predominantly Latino communities lacked the political influence to demand action from state regulators. By September 2019, Sarah had assembled a comprehensive case against Redwood Industrial Solutions. She had water quality data, photographic evidence, laboratory reports, and documentation of the company's violation history. She'd also connected with other researchers studying similar contamination issues, building a network of scientific support for her findings. Dr. Whitmore urged caution when Sarah shared her preliminary findings with him. "This is explosive material," he warned her during a phone call in early September. "You're accusing a major employer of essentially poisoning an entire watershed. You need to be absolutely certain of your facts before you go public with this." Sarah spent the next month double-checking her data, repeating experiments, and consulting with experts in environmental toxicology. Every test confirmed her initial findings. Redwood Industrial Solutions was systematically contaminating the Mendocino coast's marine environment, and their illegal activities were directly responsible for the abalone die-off that had first caught Sarah's attention. The question that haunted Sarah was what to do with this information. She could publish her findings in a scientific journal, but the peer review process would take months, during which time the contamination would continue. She could contact environmental groups, but they would need time to build a legal case. She could go to the media, but she worried about being dismissed as just another activist researcher with an agenda. The decision that would ultimately cost Sarah everything came in early October 2019, when she decided to contact the Environmental Protection Agency directly. She prepared a comprehensive report documenting Redwood Industrial Solutions violations and submitted it through the EPA's online whistleblower portal on October 8, 2019. 2 days later, Sarah received the phone call that would change everything. October 10, 2019, started like any other Thursday in Sarah's life. She woke before dawn, made her usual cup of coffee, and settled at her kitchen table to review the previous day's field notes. The cottage was quiet except for the familiar sounds of the old house, the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the whistle of wind through the window frames, the distant crash of waves against the bluffs. Emily Rodriguez, Sarah's research assistant, had arrived at the cottage around 7 p.m. that evening to help organize data for a presentation Sarah was preparing for a marine biology conference. Emily was a junior at UC Berkeley, majoring in environmental science, and she'd been working with Sarah for 6 months. She described Sarah as a mentor who'd opened her eyes to the complexity of marine ecosystems and the importance of environmental protection. Sarah was different that night, Emily told me when I interviewed her at her apartment near the Berkeley campus. Emily is 21 now, but she still carries the weight of being one of the last people to see Sarah before her disappearance. She seemed distracted, checking her phone more than usual, jumping when the house creaked. I asked if she was okay, and she said she was just tired, but I knew something was bothering her. They worked in companionable silence for about an hour, organizing Sarah's research into categories for her presentation. Sarah had decided to focus on the broader implications of abalone decline rather than her specific findings about Redwood Industrial Solutions. "Let's get the science out there first," she'd told Emily. "The other stuff can come later." At 8:30 p.m., Sarah's phone rang. Emily remembered the call vividly because Sarah's entire demeanor changed when she answered. The caller ID showed only a number with a 707 area code, local to Mendocino County, but not one Sarah recognized. "Hello?" Sarah had answered cautiously. Emily couldn't hear the caller's voice, but she watched Sarah's face grow pale as she listened. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes, with Sarah saying very little beyond, "Yes, I understand," and "That's not necessary." When Sarah hung up, she was visibly shaken. Her hands trembled as she set the phone down, and she stared at it for a long moment as if expecting it to ring again. "I need to handle something," Sarah told Emily, her voice carefully controlled. "Can we finish this tomorrow?" Emily gathered her materials, sensing that Sarah needed to be alone. As she was leaving, she turned back to ask if everything was all right, but Sarah had already disappeared into her bedroom. Emily heard the sound of drawers opening and closing, as if Sarah was looking for something. The next morning, Margaret at the village store noticed that Sarah didn't come in for her usual coffee. This was unusual enough that Margaret made a mental note of it, but she didn't think much of it at the time. People change their routines, especially when they're dealing with stress. David was more concerned when Sarah canceled their planned dive on Friday afternoon. She'd sent him a text message that morning, feeling under the weather. "Rain check on today?" David offered to bring her soup or medicine, but Sarah declined, saying she just needed to rest. When he stopped by her cottage that evening, Sarah's car was in the driveway, but she didn't answer the door. David could see lights on inside, and he thought he heard the sound of the television, but repeated knocking brought no response. He used his key, the one Sarah had given him 2 months earlier, and found the cottage empty. The scene inside the cottage was puzzling. Sarah's laptop was open on the kitchen table, still logged into her email account. A half-eaten sandwich sat on a plate beside it, as if she'd been interrupted in the middle of lunch. Her coffee mug was still warm to the touch. But Sarah was nowhere to be found, and her car keys were missing from the hook by the front door. David searched the cottage thoroughly, calling Sarah's name and checking every room. In her bedroom, he found evidence that she'd been packing. A small suitcase lay open on the bed, partially filled with clothes and toiletries. Sarah's research notebook, the leather-bound journal she carried everywhere, was gone, along with her purse and cell phone. Most disturbing was what David found in Sarah's study. File cabinets that had always been locked were standing open, their contents scattered across the floor. Papers were everywhere, research notes, lab reports, correspondence with other scientists. It looked as if someone had been searching for something specific, or perhaps Sarah had been trying to find important documents quickly. David called Sarah's cell phone repeatedly, but each call went straight to voicemail. He drove through town, checking the harbor, the library, the few restaurants that stayed open during the off-season. No one had seen Sarah since Thursday evening. By Saturday morning, David's concern had turned to fear. He contacted Dr. Whitmore, who confirmed that Sarah had missed their scheduled phone conference Friday afternoon without explanation. This was completely out of character for someone as reliable as Sarah. Dr. Whitmore's attempts to reach Sarah were equally unsuccessful. Her email account showed that she'd logged in Friday morning but hadn't responded to several messages from colleagues and students. Her university office in Berkeley was locked, and the department secretary confirmed that Sarah wasn't expected on campus until the following week. The last confirmed sighting of Sarah Chen occurred on Sunday, October 13th, at 3:20 p.m. Security footage from the Mendocino Village Shell station showed her purchasing bottled water, trail mix, and a prepaid cell phone, an unusual purchase for someone who already had a smartphone. She appeared to be alone, but the camera angle didn't show the entire parking lot. Tyler Nash, the 19-year-old clerk who served Sarah that day, remembered the interaction because of her nervous behavior. She kept looking out the windows, like she was watching for someone, Tyler told investigators later. When I asked if she was finding everything okay, she just nodded and paid in cash. Most people use cards these days, so cash transactions stick out. The security footage also revealed something that wouldn't be noticed until investigators reviewed it weeks later. In the background of the video, partially obscured by a display rack, a black SUV could be seen in the parking lot. The license plate wasn't visible, and the driver remained in the vehicle, but the SUV appeared to be positioned to observe anyone entering or leaving the store. After leaving the gas station, Sarah seemed to vanish completely. Her car, a blue 2017 Honda Civic, was never seen again. Her cell phone last pinged a tower near Fort Bragg at 4:15 p.m. on Sunday, then went silent. The prepaid phone she'd purchased was never activated. David spent Sunday evening driving every road between Mendocino and Fort Bragg, looking for Sarah's car or any sign that she'd been in the area. He checked hiking trails, beach access points, and scenic overlooks where tourists sometimes pulled off the highway. The fog had rolled in thick that afternoon, reducing visibility to just a few yards, making the search both urgent and futile. As night fell on October 13, 2019, Sarah Chen had been missing for more than 48 hours, though no one realized it yet. The mysterious phone call, the partially packed suitcase, the scattered papers in her study, all suggested that Sarah had left voluntarily, perhaps in response to some threat or emergency. But the complete absence of communication with anyone in her life suggested something far more sinister. Monday morning, October 14th, brought the kind of crisp autumn weather that makes the Mendocino coast magical. The fog had lifted overnight, revealing a landscape painted in the golden light that draws photographers and artists from around the world. But for David Crenshaw, the beauty of the morning only highlighted Sarah's absence. When Sarah failed to appear for her scheduled 9 a.m. meeting with Drive Whitmore, the professor's concern escalated to alarm. Sarah had never missed a meeting without notice, never failed to return phone calls within 24 hours. Dr. Whitmore spent Monday morning calling hospitals between San Francisco and Eureka, thinking perhaps Sarah had been in an accident and was unable to contact anyone. By Tuesday afternoon, October 15th, David could no longer convince himself that Sarah's absence had an innocent explanation. He drove to the Mendocino County Sheriff's Office in Ukiah, where he filed an official missing person report with Deputy Maria Santos, a 10-year veteran of the department who specialized in missing person cases. Deputy Santos took David's report seriously from the beginning. She'd seen too many cases where early intervention made the difference between finding someone alive and conducting a recovery operation. Sarah's profile, a responsible adult with strong community ties who disappeared without explanation, fit the pattern of cases that rarely resolve themselves. The initial investigation revealed several troubling inconsistencies. Sarah's bank records showed no unusual activity, no large cash withdrawals, no purchases that suggested she was planning to disappear voluntarily. Her credit cards hadn't been used since Friday morning, when she'd bought groceries at the Mendocino market. Most significantly, Sarah's research data had been systematically deleted from her laptop sometime between Friday evening and Sunday afternoon. The deletion wasn't random. Someone with knowledge of her work had specifically targeted files related to her investigation of Redwood Industrial Solutions while leaving her abalone research intact. Detective Frank Morrison was assigned to lead the investigation on Wednesday, October 16. Morrison was nearing retirement after 20 years with the Sheriff's Department, but he approached Sarah's case with the methodical thoroughness that had made him one of the county's most successful investigators. Morrison's first step was to reconstruct Sarah's final days through interviews with everyone who'd had contact with her. The picture that emerged was of a woman under increasing stress, though she'd tried to hide it from most people in her life. Margaret from the village store revealed that Sarah had been asking unusual questions in the weeks before her disappearance. She wanted to know about the history of the area, about which families had been here the longest, who the real power brokers were. Not the kind of questions a marine biologist usually asks. Robert Martinez, Sarah's landlord, provided another piece of the puzzle. He'd noticed increased activity around the cottage in the weeks before Sarah disappeared, cars driving slowly past the house, people walking dogs they'd never owned through the neighborhood, small aircraft flying low over the property. At the time, he'd attributed it to tourist season, but in retrospect, it seemed like surveillance. The most significant breakthrough came when Detective Morrison obtained Sarah's phone records. The mysterious call she'd received on October 10 had come from a prepaid cell phone purchased with cash at a Walmart in Santa Rosa 3 days earlier. The phone had been used only once, to call Sarah, then discarded. More disturbing was the pattern of calls Sarah had made in the days following that conversation. She'd contacted a lawyer in San Francisco who specialized in whistleblower protection, a private investigator who handled corporate security cases, and 3 different hotels in cities throughout California, apparently researching places where someone could stay anonymously. Dr. Whitmore provided the crucial context when he revealed Sarah's environmental investigation to Detective Morrison. The professor had been reluctant to discuss Sarah's unpublished research, concerned about academic confidentiality, but Sarah's safety took precedence over professional protocols. Sarah had uncovered evidence of systematic environmental crimes, Dr. Whitmore explained during his interview with Morrison. She was planning to take her findings to federal authorities, but she was also afraid. Companies like Redwood Industrial Solutions have resources to protect themselves, and Sarah was just one graduate student with a laptop and a diving suit. The investigation into Redwood Industrial Solutions revealed a company with a troubling history of silencing critics. A former employee named Janet Walsh had tried to blow the whistle on the company's illegal dumping practices in 2017, only to find herself facing a lawsuit for breach of contract and violation of non-disclosure agreements. The legal battle had bankrupted Walsh and effectively ended her career in environmental consulting. Another potential whistleblower, a water quality inspector named Carlos Mendez, had died in a single-car accident in 2018, just days before he was scheduled to testify in a state regulatory hearing about Redwood Industrial Solutions violations. The accident investigation found no evidence of foul play, but the timing was suspicious enough to attract attention from federal authorities. As Detective Morrison dug deeper into the company's operations, he discovered a web of connections between Redwood Industrial Solutions and local political figures. The company's CEO, Marcus Reed, had donated heavily to the campaigns of county supervisors, state legislators, and even federal representatives. These contributions had bought influence and protection, allowing the company to continue its illegal activities with minimal interference from regulators. The black SUV that had been spotted near Sarah's cottage and at the gas station became a central focus of the investigation. Motor vehicle records showed that Redwood Industrial Solutions leased a fleet of black Ford Expeditions for their executives and security personnel. When Morrison requested to examine these vehicles, the company's lawyers claimed they'd all been sold to out-of-state buyers just days after Sarah's disappearance. Emily Rodriguez provided another crucial piece of evidence when she remembered something she'd initially forgotten. On the night of October 10, when Sarah received the threatening phone call, Emily had noticed a man sitting in a car across the street from the cottage. The man appeared to be watching the house, and when Emily looked again a few minutes later, he was gone. He was wearing a baseball cap, so I couldn't see his face clearly, Emily told Detective Morrison. But he had broad shoulders, like someone who worked out regularly. The car was dark-colored, maybe black or dark blue. I remember thinking it was odd because most of the neighbors drive older cars, and this one looked expensive. The investigation also revealed that Sarah had been in contact with someone she identified only as Deep Blue in her encrypted emails. These communications, recovered from Sarah's cloud storage account, painted a picture of someone else within Redwood Industrial Solutions who was willing to provide inside information about the company's illegal activities. The messages from Deep Blue were cryptic but alarming. "They know about your EPA report," one message read. "Security has been asking about researchers in the area. You need to be careful." Another message, sent just 2 days before Sarah's disappearance, was even more ominous: "Something big is happening. They're bringing in outside people to handle problems. Get somewhere safe." Detective Morrison worked with federal authorities to try to identify Deep Blue, but the emails had been sent through multiple proxy servers, making them nearly impossible to trace. Whoever Deep Blue was, they understood operational security and were taking significant precautions to protect their identity. The search for Sarah expanded throughout Mendocino County. Volunteer searchers combed hiking trails and beach access points. The Coast Guard deployed boats and helicopters to search the rugged coastline where Sarah had conducted much of her research. Dive teams explored underwater caves and kelp forests where a body might have been hidden or washed ashore. For 5 days, the community rallied around the search effort. Local businesses provided food and supplies for the volunteers. The Mendocino Volunteer Fire Department coordinated search teams. Even Marcus Reed and several Redwood Industrial Solutions executives participated in the searches, projecting an image of concerned corporate citizens helping to find a missing researcher. But the searches yielded nothing. No trace of Sarah, her car, or any of her personal belongings. It was as if she had simply vanished into the coastal fog that rolled in each evening, leaving behind only questions and the growing fear that something terrible had happened to her. 3 weeks after Sarah's disappearance, just as the daily search efforts were beginning to wind down, a hiker made a discovery that reignited the investigation. Karen Mitchell, a retired teacher from Fort Bragg, was walking her golden retriever along the banks of Brush Creek, the same waterway where Sarah had first discovered the environmental contamination, when her dog began pawing at something partially buried in the creek bed. It was Sarah's research notebook, the leather-bound journal she'd carried everywhere during her time in Mendocino. The notebook was water-damaged but still readable, its pages swollen and discolored but holding their secrets intact. Most importantly, it contained entries dated up to October 14, the day after Sarah's last confirmed sighting. Detective Morrison carefully photographed each page before sending the notebook to the State Crime Lab for analysis. The final entries revealed Sarah's growing paranoia and her desperate attempts to protect her research from what she clearly believed was a coordinated effort to silence her. October 12, one entry read in Sarah's familiar handwriting. Car followed me to the harbor today. Same black SUV I've seen 3 times this week. When I doubled back to get a license plate number, it disappeared. David thinks I'm being paranoid, but something is wrong. The timing of everything, the phone call, the deleted files, the surveillance, it's too coordinated to be coincidence. The October 14th entry was the most chilling. Deep Blue was right. They're not just trying to discredit me, they want me gone. Found tracking device under my car this morning. GPS unit, professional grade. Moving to safe location until I can figure out next steps. If something happens to me, everything they need is in the red box under the floorboards in the study. The truth needs to come out, even if I can't be the one to tell it. When investigators returned to Sarah's cottage, they found the red box exactly where her note indicated. Hidden beneath loose floorboards in her study were copies of all her evidence against Redwood Industrial Solutions, water quality reports, photographs of illegal dumping, correspondence with regulatory agencies, and most damaging of all, internal company documents that someone had leaked to her showing the company's executives knew about and approved the illegal dumping operations. The documents revealed the scope of Redwood Industrial Solutions crimes. For nearly a decade, the company had been systematically dumping untreated industrial waste into Brush Creek and other waterways throughout Northern California. The savings from avoiding proper waste treatment had generated millions of dollars in additional profits, money that had been used to expand operations and purchase political influence. More disturbing were email chains between company executives discussing how to handle the researcher problem. Marcus Reed had written to his head of security, a former military contractor named Vincent Kozlov, instructing him to neutralize the threat using whatever means necessary. The FBI became involved in the case in December 2019, treating Sarah's disappearance as a potential case of corporate retaliation against a whistleblower. Federal agents descended on Redwood Industrial Solutions facilities with search warrants, seizing computers, financial records, and company communications. The federal investigation revealed a company culture of intimidation and violence. Vincent Kozlov had assembled a team of security contractors with backgrounds in military special operations and corporate espionage. These men were well paid to handle sensitive situations that required discretion and deniability. 3 of Kozlov's contractors, Michael Torres, James Patterson, and Robert Kim, had been in the Mendocino area during the week of Sarah's disappearance. Hotel records showed they'd checked into the Little River Inn on October 8, the same day Sarah had submitted her report to the EPA. They'd checked out on October 16, the day after Sarah was officially reported missing. When FBI agents attempted to interview these men, they discovered that Torres had died in a motorcycle accident in Nevada just weeks after Sarah's disappearance. Patterson had left the country, reportedly taking a security job in Eastern Europe. Kim claimed to have no memory of what he'd been doing in Mendocino, citing medical issues related to his military service. The investigation took an unexpected turn in January 2020 when Sarah's Honda Civic was discovered in a long-term parking lot at San Francisco International Airport. The car had been there since October 14, according to parking records, though airport security cameras showed no record of Sarah entering the terminal. The car's discovery generated new hope that Sarah might have fled voluntarily, perhaps using the confusion around her disappearance to start a new life somewhere safe. But forensic analysis of the vehicle told a different story. The car had been wiped clean of fingerprints and DNA evidence, suggesting professional involvement. Sarah's personal belongings were gone, but investigators found traces of industrial chemicals in the trunk, the same chemicals that Redwood Industrial Solutions had been illegally dumping. David Crenshaw clung to the hope that Sarah was alive somewhere, living under a new identity and waiting for the day it would be safe to return. She was smart, he told me during one of our conversations at the Harbor Cafe. If anyone could disappear completely and build a new life, it would be Sarah. Sometimes I imagine getting a postcard from some remote coastal town, just her signature and coordinates for a dive site she wants to show me. Dr. Whitmore was less optimistic. Sarah loved her research too much to abandon it, he said. She'd spent years building relationships with the scientific community, establishing her reputation. If she was alive and safe, she would have found a way to get her environmental findings published. The fact that her research died with her disappearance tells me that Sarah herself is gone. The FBI investigation ultimately resulted in federal charges against Marcus Reed and 5 other Redwood Industrial Solutions executives. The company was forced to pay $127 million in fines and cleanup costs, and Reed himself received a 10-year prison sentence for environmental crimes and conspiracy charges related to Sarah's disappearance. But the criminal convictions provided little comfort to those who had known and loved Sarah. The men directly responsible for her disappearance had vanished as completely as Sarah herself, protected by the same network of contacts and resources that had allowed them to operate with impunity for so many years. Vincent Kozlov was found dead in his Las Vegas apartment in March 2020, an apparent suicide by gunshot. He left behind a note apologizing to his family for the things I did for money, but provided no details about his specific crimes. His death closed off what investigators believed was their best chance of learning what had actually happened to Sarah Chen. As the second anniversary of Sarah's disappearance approached, new evidence emerged that would reshape the entire investigation. A former Redwood Industrial Solutions employee named Patricia Wong came forward with information she'd been too frightened to share during the initial FBI investigation. Wong had worked as an administrative assistant in the company's executive offices and had access to Marcus Reed's calendar and correspondence. She revealed that on October 11, 2019, the day after Sarah received the threatening phone call, Reed had held an emergency meeting with Vincent Kozlov and 3 outside contractors. I wasn't supposed to be in the office that evening, Wong told federal investigators. But I'd forgotten some files I needed for the next day. I could hear them talking in Mr. Reed's office, and what I heard terrified me. According to Wong, Reed had instructed Kozlov to make the researcher disappear permanently and to clean up any loose ends that might connect back to the company. The conversation included discussion of locations where someone could be disposed of without leaving evidence, and specific plans for disposing of Sarah's car and personal belongings. Wong's testimony provided the missing link that federal prosecutors needed to file murder charges against Marcus Reed and his co-conspirators. But by the time arrest warrants were issued, Reed had fled the country, reportedly to a non-extradition jurisdiction in South America where he'd been moving money through shell companies for years. The revelation that Sarah had likely been murdered rather than simply disappeared brought some closure to her family and friends, but it also deepened their grief. The hope that she might someday return home was replaced by the terrible certainty that she'd died because she tried to protect the environment she loved. 4 years have passed since Sarah Chen disappeared from the coastal town that had become her home, but her presence lingers in Mendocino like the morning fog that rolls in from the Pacific. Her story has become part of the community's collective memory, a reminder of the price that truth-tellers sometimes pay in a world where corporate interests often outweigh individual lives. The cottage on Little Lake Road remains empty, though Robert Martinez has received dozens of inquiries from potential renters over the years. It doesn't feel right, he told me when I asked why he hasn't re-rented the property. Sarah loved that place, and it loved her back. Until we know for certain what happened to her, it should stay as it was when she lived there. The cottage has become an unofficial memorial to Sarah's memory. Margaret from the village store tends a small garden beside the front gate, planting the native coastal flowers that Sarah had admired during her morning walks. David Crenshaw stops by regularly to maintain the property, keeping the windows clean and the driveway clear of fallen branches from the towering redwoods. Inside the cottage, Sarah's presence is everywhere. Her books still line the shelves in the study, field guides to marine life, scientific journals, novels about the sea that she'd read during quiet evenings. Her diving equipment hangs in the closet, wetsuit and mask waiting for a dive that will never come. Robert has left everything exactly as Sarah arranged it, creating a time capsule of a life interrupted. The impact of Sarah's research extends far beyond Mendocino County. The environmental crimes she uncovered led to one of the largest environmental cleanup efforts in Northern California history. The contaminated waterways she'd identified have been restored, and the marine life populations she'd studied are slowly recovering. Dr. Whitmore completed Sarah's abalone research using the data she'd collected during her time in Mendocino. The resulting paper, published in the Journal of Marine Biology with Sarah listed as the primary author, has become one of the most cited studies in recent marine conservation literature. Sarah's work will influence environmental policy for generations, Dr. Whitmore told me. Her death was a tragedy, but her research lives on. The Sarah Chen Foundation for Environmental Protection, established by her parents, provides grants for young researchers studying coastal conservation. The foundation has funded dozens of research projects along the Pacific coast, continuing Sarah's work of documenting and protecting marine ecosystems. Each year, the foundation awards the Sarah Chen Memorial Fellowship to a graduate student whose research shows the potential to make a significant environmental impact. Thomas and Linda Chen have aged visibly in the years since their daughter's disappearance, but they've channeled their grief into activism and advocacy. They speak regularly at conferences about the dangers faced by environmental researchers and the need for better protection of whistleblowers who expose corporate crimes. Sarah always said that the ocean doesn't recognize political boundaries or corporate interests, Linda Chen told me during our interview at their Sacramento home. She believed that protecting the environment was a moral imperative that transcended personal safety. We're trying to honor that belief by supporting other young people who share her passion for the truth. David Crenshaw has never stopped believing that Sarah might still be alive somewhere. He's followed up on dozens of reported sightings over the years, a woman matching Sarah's description spotted at a farmer's market in Oregon, a marine biologist working under an assumed name at a research station in Alaska, a diver exploring coral reefs in Hawaii who reminded someone of Sarah's photograph. None of these leads have produced evidence that Sarah survived her disappearance, but David continues to hope. "She was the strongest person I ever knew," he said during our last conversation at the harbor where they used to meet. "If anyone could survive what happened to her and build a new life, it would be Sarah. I keep thinking that someday I'll get a message from her, telling me she's safe and ready to come home." The Linda Marie, David's fishing boat, still carries equipment that Sarah had given him, an underwater camera for documenting unusual species, water testing kits for monitoring ocean chemistry, GPS coordinates for dive sites they'd explored together. David has continued Sarah's citizen science work, reporting his observations to researchers studying climate change impacts on marine ecosystems. Emily Rodriguez completed her environmental science degree and is now pursuing graduate studies in marine biology at UC San Diego. She credits Sarah with inspiring her career choice and her commitment to environmental protection. "Sarah showed me that science isn't just about collecting data," Emily told me. "It's about using that data to make the world a better place, even when that means taking risks." Emily has returned to Mendocino several times over the years, visiting the monitoring sites where she worked with Sarah and continuing some of the research they'd begun together. She's documenting the recovery of the marine ecosystems that Sarah had fought to protect, creating a record of how environmental restoration can succeed when corporate pollution is stopped. The broader scientific community has rallied around Sarah's memory and her research. The International Association of Marine Biologists established the Sarah Chen Award for Courage in Environmental Research, recognizing scientists who risk their safety to expose environmental crimes. The award has brought international attention to the dangers faced by environmental researchers around the world. But perhaps the most fitting memorial to Sarah's life is the gradual return of life to the waters she'd studied. The abalone populations in the monitoring sites she'd established are showing signs of recovery. Sea stars are thriving in tide pools that had been lifeless 4 years ago. The water quality in Brush Creek and other contaminated waterways has improved dramatically since Redwood Industrial Solutions was forced to cease operations. Margaret from the village store keeps a photograph of Sarah behind the counter, a candid shot taken during one of the summer festivals that bring tourists to Mendocino. In the photo, Sarah is laughing at something off camera, her face animated with joy and intelligence. Customers sometimes ask about the photograph, and Margaret tells them Sarah's story, ensuring that her memory remains alive in the community she'd grown to love. She was going to make a difference, Margaret always concludes her stories about Sarah. And in the end, she did make a difference, even though it cost her everything. That's the kind of person Sarah was. She couldn't stand by and watch the ocean be destroyed, even when speaking up put her in danger. As we near the end of Sarah's story, there are still questions that may never be answered. Despite years of investigation by local, state, and federal authorities, Sarah's body has never been found. The men directly responsible for her disappearance have vanished as completely as Sarah herself, taking their secrets with them to graves scattered across the world. Detective Frank Morrison, now retired, still thinks about the case regularly. He keeps Sarah's file on his desk at home, occasionally reviewing the evidence and looking for connections he might have missed. In 30 years of law enforcement, I've never had a case affect me the way Sarah's did, he told me. She was trying to do the right thing, and she paid the ultimate price for it. Cases like that stay with you. Morrison believes that Sarah was murdered within 24 hours of her disappearance, probably on October 14 or 15, 2019. The professional nature of the operation, the clean removal of evidence, the disposal of her car, the complete elimination of any forensic traces, suggests military or intelligence-level expertise in making people disappear. The men who took Sarah weren't street criminals, Morrison explained. They were professionals who'd done this kind of work before. They knew how to make someone vanish without leaving evidence, and they had the resources to cover their tracks completely. The FBI investigation concluded that Sarah's body was most likely disposed of in the Pacific Ocean, weighted down in deep water where it would never be recovered. The rugged Mendocino coastline offers hundreds of locations where someone could be taken out to sea and never found. The same ocean that Sarah had dedicated her life to studying became her final resting place. But David Crenshaw has never accepted this conclusion. He spent countless hours searching remote beaches and hidden coves along the coast, looking for any sign that Sarah might have survived her abduction. His knowledge of the local waters, gained through a lifetime of fishing, has taken him to places that official search teams never explored. The ocean gives up its secrets eventually, David told me during one of our walks along the bluffs where Sarah used to collect data. Bodies wash ashore, debris surfaces, currents carry things back to land. If Sarah was in the water, we would have found something by now. The fact that we haven't found anything makes me think she might still be out there somewhere. There have been tantalizing hints over the years that Sarah might have survived. A marine biologist working at a research station in British Columbia bore a striking resemblance to Sarah's photographs, but she turned out to be a Canadian citizen with no connection to the case. Security footage from a ferry terminal in Washington state showed a woman who walked like Sarah and had similar hair, but the image was too unclear for positive identification. More intriguingly, there have been reports of someone continuing Sarah's research in remote locations along the Pacific coast. Water quality data has been anonymously submitted to environmental agencies, documenting pollution in areas where no official monitoring programs exist. The data collection methods and analysis techniques are identical to those Sarah used during her time in Mendocino. Dr. Whitmore has received several packages over the years containing marine specimens and detailed observation notes, always postmarked from different locations and with no return address. The handwriting doesn't match Sarah's, but the scientific methodology and attention to detail are remarkably similar to her approach. Part of me wants to believe that Sarah found a way to escape and is continuing her work under a new identity, Dr. Whitmore admitted during our interview. The data that's been submitted anonymously is exactly the kind of research Sarah would be conducting if she was still alive. But I know that's probably wishful thinking. The more likely explanation is that other researchers have been inspired by Sarah's work and are continuing it in her memory. The mystery deepened in 2022 when a package arrived at the Sarah Chen Foundation containing $50,000 in cash and a handwritten note that simply read, "For the abalone." The money was used to fund a major restoration project at Sarah's original monitoring sites, but efforts to trace the donation source were unsuccessful. The handwriting on the note was analyzed by forensic experts, but it didn't match any samples in law enforcement databases. The paper was generic office stock available at thousands of retailers, and the envelope bore no distinguishing marks. Like so many aspects of Sarah's case, the donation raised more questions than it answered. Thomas and Linda Chen have made peace with the uncertainty surrounding their daughter's fate. They've chosen to focus on the positive impact of Sarah's work rather than dwelling on the circumstances of her disappearance. "We may never know exactly what happened to Sarah," Linda told me, "but we know that her research is still making a difference. Every time we fund a new fellowship or support a conservation project, a part of Sarah lives on." The Chens have visited Mendocino several times over the years, staying in a bed and breakfast near the cottage where Sarah lived. They've walked the beaches where she conducted her research, visited the tide pools she studied, and met with the people who knew and loved their daughter during her time in the coastal community. "Mendocino gave Sarah something she'd never found anywhere else," Thomas Chen observed. "She found a purpose there, a cause worth fighting for, and people who appreciated her dedication to protecting the environment. In a way, she's still there, in the work that continues and the memory that endures." As the years pass, Sarah Chen's disappearance has become part of the folklore of Mendocino County, a story passed down among residents and retold to visitors who ask about the empty cottage on Little Lake Road. But for those who knew her personally, Sarah remains a vivid presence, her passion for marine conservation inspiring a new generation of environmental researchers. The cottage where Sarah lived has been designated as a historical landmark by the Mendocino Heritage Foundation, ensuring that it will be preserved as a memorial to her life and work. Plans are underway to convert the property into a research station where visiting scientists can study the marine ecosystems that Sarah fought to protect. Sarah believed that the truth would always surface eventually, like a message in a bottle washing up on shore, Dr. Whitmore reflected. "Maybe someday we'll learn what really happened to her. But even if we don't, her legacy is secure. The ocean is cleaner because of her work, and the environment is better protected because of her courage." And so we come to the end of Sarah Chen's story, though in many ways, her story continues every day. It continues in the graduate students who receive fellowships in her name, in the restored tide pools where marine life is thriving again, in the stricter environmental regulations that prevent other companies from following Redwood Industrial Solutions' destructive path. Sarah's disappearance remains officially unsolved, but her impact on the world is undeniable. She came to Mendocino as a young researcher studying abalone decline and discovered something much larger, a systematic assault on the marine environment that she couldn't ignore, even when fighting it cost her everything. Tonight, as the rain falls gently outside your window, picture the Mendocino coast as Sarah knew it. Imagine the fog rolling in from the Pacific, carrying the salt smell of the ocean and the sound of waves against the rocky shore. Think of the tide pools she explored, now teeming with life thanks to the protection her research provided. Whether Sarah Chen is resting somewhere beneath the Pacific waves she loved so much, or living quietly under a new name in some distant coastal town, her work continues. Every time someone chooses to protect the environment despite personal risk, every time a researcher exposes corporate wrongdoing despite the potential consequences, Sarah's courage lives on. The cottage on Little Lake Road sits peacefully in the redwood forest, waiting for the day when its mysteries might finally be revealed. But until that day comes, it stands as a testament to a young woman who believed that the truth was worth any sacrifice, and that the ocean's health was more important than her own safety. Let Sarah's story remind you that individual actions can make a difference, that courage comes in many forms, and that sometimes the most important battles are fought by people whose names we never learn, whose sacrifices we never fully understand. As you drift off to sleep tonight, let the sound of falling rain carry away your worries and concerns. Let it wash over you like the Pacific waves that Sarah loved so much, bringing peace and rest and the gentle promise that tomorrow brings new possibilities for making the world a better place. Sleep well, knowing that somewhere in the world, researchers like Sarah continue their work, protecting the environment and seeking truth despite the risks. And if you're still awake and listening, please don't forget to comment where you're listening from and the current time in your corner of the world. Also, be sure to like this video and subscribe if you haven't already, so you don't miss our daily true crime stories for sleep. Now, let's move on to our next story. Story 2. I want to tell you about Lauren Cho, a 30-year-old artist whose story began in the suburbs of New Jersey and ended somewhere in the endless expanse of sand and Joshua trees, leaving behind questions that echo across the desert wind. This isn't just another missing person case. This is the story of a woman who lived her life like a piece of art in progress, sometimes beautiful, sometimes chaotic, always authentic. Lauren, who friends called Elle, had dreams that stretched as wide as the desert sky and a spirit that refused to be contained by conventional boundaries. But on June 28, 2021, that free spirit walked into the Mojave Desert and simply vanished, as if the earth itself had swallowed her whole. This is Lauren's story, told with the respect and care that every missing person deserves. It's a story about love and conflict, about dreams deferred and choices that can't be undone, about the particular kind of loneliness that can drive someone to walk alone into one of the most unforgiving landscapes on earth. Lauren Cho was born in 1990 in New Jersey, the daughter of parents who had built their American dream through hard work and sacrifice. Her childhood was comfortable but not extravagant, the kind of middle-class existence that provides stability while still leaving room for dreams to grow. From an early age, Lauren showed an artistic temperament that set her apart from her peers. Picture a young girl with dark hair that seemed to catch light in interesting ways, always carrying a sketchbook, always observing the world with eyes that saw beauty in unexpected places. Her teachers noticed that while other children drew houses with triangle roofs and stick-figure families, Lauren created complex compositions that suggested an old soul living in a young body. Her parents, practical people who understood the value of financial security, gently encouraged Lauren to consider more traditional career paths. But Lauren was drawn to art the way others are drawn to music or mathematics. It wasn't something she chose, it was something that chose her. By high school, she was spending every free moment in the art room, experimenting with different mediums, pushing boundaries, creating pieces that made her instructors pause and really look. Friends from those days remember Lauren as intensely creative but also deeply empathetic. She was the friend who remembered birthdays, who noticed when someone was struggling, who could make you laugh when the world felt too heavy. She had this gift for making people feel seen and understood, perhaps because she spent so much time observing and translating the world around her into visual form. Lauren attended college in New Jersey, studying art while her parents quietly hoped she might develop a backup plan. But college only deepened her commitment to artistic expression. She experimented with photography, fell in love with mixed media, and began developing the unique style that would define her work, a blend of stark realism and dreamlike surrealism that captured both the beauty and the melancholy of everyday life. During her college years, Lauren began showing signs of the restlessness that would eventually define her adult life. She would disappear for weekends, driving hours to visit galleries in New York City or Philadelphia, sleeping in her car to save money, living on coffee and determination. Her professors saw her potential but worried about her practical prospects in an increasingly difficult field. After graduation, Lauren faced the reality that confronts every artist: how to maintain creative integrity while paying rent. She worked a series of jobs that felt temporary but somehow stretched into years. Retail positions, food service, administrative work, anything that would provide enough income to support her art without consuming all her creative energy. But Lauren chafed against routine. Friends noticed that she would throw herself into a job for months, earning praise from supervisors, building relationships with coworkers, and then suddenly announce she was moving on. It wasn't irresponsibility exactly, she always gave notice, always left on good terms, but she seemed incapable of settling into any situation for very long. In her mid-20s, Lauren made the decision that would ultimately change the trajectory of her life. She decided to move west. Like countless artists before her, she was drawn by the promise of wider horizons, cheaper rent, and communities more accepting of unconventional lifestyles. California called to her with its promise of year-round warmth and artistic communities that might better understand her vision. The transition wasn't easy. Lauren's parents worried about their daughter living so far from family support systems. Her New Jersey friends felt abandoned, unsure whether Lauren's move represented growth or flight. But Lauren felt, for the first time in years, that she was moving towards something rather than away from it. She initially settled in various California cities, a few months in San Francisco, a stint in Los Angeles, time spent in smaller communities up and down the coast. Each place taught her something different about herself and her art. In San Francisco, she learned to appreciate urban grit as artistic subject matter. In Los Angeles, she discovered the particular quality of desert light that would later become central to her work. In smaller towns, she found the quiet necessary for deep creative work. By her late 20s, Lauren had embraced what she called her nomadic period. Instead of signing long-term leases, she began moving every few months, staying in sublets, house-sitting for friends, occasionally sleeping in her car when necessary. To outside observers, this lifestyle might have seemed unstable or irresponsible, but for Lauren, it represented freedom. She documented this period extensively through her photography and sketches. Her work from these years shows a fascination with transience, empty highways at dawn, abandoned buildings reclaimed by nature, the possessions people leave behind when they move on. There's a beauty in her work, but also a profound loneliness that speaks to the cost of choosing freedom over security. Lauren's family grew increasingly concerned during this period. Phone calls home became less frequent and more strained. When they did talk, Lauren would describe her latest adventure with enthusiasm, but her parents heard something else beneath the excitement, an underlying anxiety, a sense that she was searching for something she couldn't quite name. Her art during this period began attracting more serious attention. A gallery in Sacramento showed several of her pieces, and she began selling work through online platforms. The validation was intoxicating, proof that her unconventional choices were leading somewhere meaningful. But success in art is sporadic and unpredictable, and Lauren still struggled with the basic necessities of food and shelter. Friends from this period describe Lauren as simultaneously the most confident and most vulnerable person they knew. She could walk into any situation and make it work, charming strangers, finding opportunity where others saw obstacles, creating beauty out of nothing. But she also seemed to be carrying a weight that she couldn't or wouldn't share, a sadness that appeared in quiet moments when she thought no one was watching. It was during one of her stays in Northern California that Lauren met Cody Orell. Cody was in his early 20s, nearly a decade younger than Lauren, working construction and living the kind of straightforward life that Lauren had been running from since college. But sometimes opposites create a magnetic pull that's impossible to ignore. Friends who witnessed their early interactions describe an immediate chemistry that surprised everyone, including Lauren and Cody themselves. He was drawn to her artistic vision and worldliness, the way she could make even mundane experiences feel like adventures. She was attracted to his stability and genuineness. After years of meeting people who were also searching for themselves, she found something appealing about someone who seemed comfortable in his own skin. Their relationship developed quickly, with an intensity that both thrilled and concerned those around them. Lauren, who had always maintained careful emotional boundaries, found herself opening up to Cody in ways that surprised her. She began staying at his place for weeks at a time, the longest she had remained anywhere in years. Cody, for his part, was enchanted by Lauren's artistic world. He began accompanying her to gallery openings and art events, places where he initially felt out of place but gradually learned to appreciate. Lauren enjoyed playing teacher, introducing him to artists and movements that had shaped her worldview. Their differences in age and experience created a dynamic that was part romantic partnership, part mentorship. For several months, the relationship seemed to provide what both Lauren and Cody needed. She found in him an anchor that allowed her to slow down without feeling trapped. He discovered through her a larger world of creativity and possibility. They talked about traveling together, about Lauren teaching him photography, about finding a place where his practical skills and her artistic vision might complement each other. But relationships that burn bright often burn fast, and by early 2021, cracks began appearing in their dynamic. Lauren's need for freedom began chafing against Cody's desire for more traditional relationship milestones. He wanted to make plans, to build something together that extended beyond the immediate moment. She felt the familiar restlessness creeping back, the sense that staying still too long would somehow diminish her. Friends noticed the tension manifesting in small ways. Lauren would make plans with Cody and then cancel at the last minute, claiming she needed to work on a project or visit another friend. Cody would suggest activities that required advance planning, concerts, weekend trips, and Lauren would agree enthusiastically but seem anxious as the dates approached. The age difference, which had initially seemed insignificant, began creating subtle conflicts. Cody was at a life stage where building career and relationship stability felt natural and necessary. Lauren, having already spent years pursuing traditional paths before choosing her nomadic lifestyle, felt like she was being asked to go backward. By spring 2021, Lauren and Cody's romantic relationship had officially ended, but neither seemed ready to completely let go. It's a situation many of us have experienced, that gray area where you're no longer together but not quite apart, where the connection remains even as the original relationship structure dissolves. Lauren continued staying at Cody's place intermittently, sleeping in the guest room, maintaining what they both insisted was friendship. But friends observed an underlying tension that suggested unresolved feelings on both sides. Lauren seemed torn between her need for independence and her genuine affection for Cody. He appeared to be hoping that patience and kindness might eventually win her back. This arrangement created stress for both of them. Lauren felt guilty about accepting Cody's hospitality while being unable to offer him the relationship he wanted. Cody struggled with watching Lauren prepare to leave again, knowing he couldn't ask her to stay without risking pushing her away entirely. Their friends were divided in their opinions about the situation. Some thought Lauren was being unfair to Cody, accepting his support while keeping him at arm's length. Others believed Cody was pressuring Lauren by maintaining a connection that wasn't healthy for either of them. Most simply hoped they would figure out a way to either rebuild their relationship or create enough distance to heal separately. By late May 2021, both Lauren and Cody seemed to recognize that their current arrangement wasn't sustainable. Lauren needed space to figure out her next chapter, and Cody needed clarity about where he stood in her life. It was in this context that they made the decision that would lead to tragedy, to spend some time together in the desert, away from their usual environment, to see if they could find a way forward. The idea of going to the desert came from Lauren. She had been drawn to desert landscapes throughout her time in California, fascinated by the stark beauty and endless horizons that offered such contrast to her East Coast upbringing. She had visited Joshua Tree National Park several times, always leaving with sketchbooks full of ideas and a sense of spiritual renewal that the desert seemed to provide. Yucca Valley appealed to Lauren for several reasons. It was close enough to Joshua Tree to satisfy her artistic inspiration, but far enough from major population centers to provide the isolation she craved. The town itself was small and unpretentious, the kind of place where people minded their own business and artists could work without judgment or distraction. For Cody, the desert represented an opportunity to spend uninterrupted time with Lauren, away from the friends and influences that seemed to pull her in different directions. He hoped that in the simplicity and silence of the desert, they might be able to have the honest conversations that had been eluding them for months. They found an Airbnb on Benmar Trail, a modest house that promised the privacy and space they both seemed to need. The listing showed a typical desert home, single-story, surrounded by desert landscaping, with large windows designed to capture the dramatic sunrises and sunsets that make desert living appealing to artists and contemplatives. Lauren and Cody arrived in Yucca Valley in late May 2021, as the desert was transitioning from its mild spring into the brutal heat of summer. For Lauren, the change in environment was immediately inspiring. She began taking photographs as soon as they arrived, capturing the way late afternoon light transformed the landscape into something that seemed almost otherworldly. The house on Ben Mar Trail sat on a quiet residential street where homes were spaced far enough apart to provide real privacy. Their nearest neighbors were friendly but respectful of boundaries, the kind of people who chose desert living specifically to avoid the complications of urban proximity. Lauren appreciated the solitude, while Cody found the silence initially uncomfortable after years of city living. During their first week in the desert, both Lauren and Cody seemed to be finding their rhythm. Lauren set up a workspace where she could paint and work on photography, spreading her materials across the dining table and transforming the space into a temporary studio. Cody, with his construction background, made small improvements to the property, fixing a loose screen door and adjusting irrigation for the desert plants. They established routines that accommodated both their needs and their complicated relationship status. Morning coffee together, then Lauren would work on her art while Cody read or worked on small projects. Afternoons were often spent exploring the area, drives through Joshua Tree, visits to local galleries, walks through the desert neighborhoods where each house seemed to tell its own story of people seeking something different from life. The desert began working its particular magic on both of them, but in different ways. For Lauren, the vast landscapes and dramatic light provided endless artistic inspiration. Her sketches from this period show a fascination with negative space, with the way emptiness itself could be a subject. She began experimenting with photography that captured the interplay between the organic shapes of Joshua trees and the geometric lines of desert architecture. Cody found the desert more challenging to embrace. As someone accustomed to the constant activity and clear objectives of construction work, the open-ended nature of desert time felt unstructuring. He began to understand why Lauren was drawn to this environment, but he also began to worry that the very qualities that inspired her artistically might be pulling her further away from any possibility of conventional relationship stability. By mid-June, the temperature was regularly exceeding 100 degrees during the day, confining most outdoor activities to early morning and late evening. The heat created a different rhythm of life, intense focus during the cooler hours, languid waiting during the scorching afternoons. Lauren seemed to thrive in this environment, while Cody found the forced inactivity during the hottest parts of the day somewhat claustrophobic. Friends who spoke with Lauren during this period noticed a change in her voice and energy. She sounded more centered than she had in months, as if the desert was providing something she hadn't even realized she needed. She talked about possibly extending their stay, about finding a more permanent place in the area, about the body of work she was developing that could only have been created in this specific environment. While Lauren was finding artistic fulfillment in the desert, the isolation was beginning to amplify the unresolved tensions in her relationship with Cody. Without the distractions of their normal routines, conversations that had been easy to avoid suddenly became unavoidable. The desert has a way of stripping away everything except what's essential, and what was essential between them were questions neither wanted to ask. Lauren had always been someone who processed emotions through her art, and her work during this period began reflecting internal conflicts that she wasn't yet ready to discuss openly. Her sketches showed figures in isolation, landscapes that suggested both freedom and loneliness, compositions that balanced beauty with an underlying sense of unease. Cody, meanwhile, was struggling with the reality that the time and space he had hoped would bring them closer together seemed to be having the opposite effect. He watched Lauren become more absorbed in her work, more distant in their conversations, more likely to spend hours walking alone in the desert while he remained at the house. The practical aspects of their living situation were also becoming more complicated. They were sharing space as former lovers trying to be friends, sleeping in separate rooms but navigating the intimacy of domestic routines. Small things became loaded with meaning, who made coffee in the morning, how they split grocery costs, what to do when one wanted to watch television and the other needed quiet for creative work. Friends who knew both Lauren and Cody well have since reflected that June 2021 might have represented their last opportunity to have the honest conversation their relationship needed. Both seemed to be waiting for the other to initiate a discussion about their future, and both seemed afraid of what that conversation might reveal. Lauren, who had always prided herself on her emotional honesty, found herself unable to articulate what she was feeling. She knew she cared deeply for Cody, but she also knew that caring wasn't the same as being able to build the kind of life he wanted. She had spent years learning to trust her instincts about when situations were right for her, and something about their dynamic, despite all its positive elements, felt fundamentally misaligned with her needs. Cody, for his part, was beginning to realize that his hope of winning Lauren back might be preventing both of them from moving forward. He could see that she was pulling away, but he couldn't bring himself to have the conversation that might end their connection entirely. The desert, which he had hoped would provide clarity, instead seemed to be magnifying his confusion. The age difference that had initially seemed charming was becoming more problematic in the forced intimacy of their desert retreat. Lauren had already lived through the phase of life where she tried to make relationships work through compromise and accommodation. Cody was still in the stage where love felt like something that could overcome any obstacle if both people tried hard enough. As June progressed, external factors began adding stress to their already complicated situation. Lauren was running low on money, a chronic issue that had followed her throughout her nomadic period. The Airbnb was expensive enough that staying much longer would create financial problems she couldn't easily solve. She had been hoping to sell some of her art to fund her next chapter, but the desert work, while personally meaningful, wasn't immediately marketable. The pieces she was creating required time to develop and find the right audience. Meanwhile, rent was due weekly, and her savings were depleting faster than her income could replenish them. Cody was covering most of their shared expenses, a situation that made Lauren increasingly uncomfortable. She had always insisted on financial independence, even when it meant living with uncertainty. Accepting support from someone she couldn't offer a relationship to felt like a compromise of her values. The practical pressures created additional emotional complications. Lauren felt guilty about accepting Cody's generosity while being unable to give him what he wanted. Cody felt frustrated that his attempts to help were creating distance rather than closeness. Both were beginning to feel trapped in a situation that had been meant to provide freedom and clarity. By late June, the desert heat was becoming oppressive, regularly exceeding 110 degrees during the afternoon hours. The house, while adequate, wasn't perfectly climate-controlled, and the extreme temperatures created physical discomfort that amplified emotional tensions. Lauren, who had initially loved the dramatic intensity of desert weather, began feeling claustrophobic during the hours when going outside was dangerous. Cody, already struggling with the open-ended nature of their situation, found the heat-imposed restrictions on activity particularly difficult. Their conversations during this period began taking on an edge that friends noticed during phone calls. Lauren would describe feeling restless and confined, while Cody would express frustration with her inability to simply enjoy what they had together. Neither was wrong, but they were increasingly unable to find common ground. The isolation that had initially seemed romantic was becoming a source of stress. In their normal environment, they could escape tension by visiting friends, going to different places, maintaining some independence within their connection. In the desert house, there was nowhere to go and no one else to talk to. Lauren began taking longer walks alone, early in the morning before the heat became dangerous. These walks seemed to provide her with something she couldn't find inside the house: space to think, freedom to move, escape from the weight of unspoken expectations. Cody watched her leave on these walks with growing anxiety, sensing that she was pulling away but unsure how to bridge the distance. June 28, 2021, began like many other desert mornings, with Lauren waking early to catch the brief window of comfortable temperature before the sun made outdoor activity dangerous. She had been having trouble sleeping, a combination of the heat and the emotional stress that had been building for weeks. By 6 a.m., she was already up, making coffee and settling into her workspace with her sketchbook. Cody woke to find Lauren already absorbed in her work, a scene that had become routine but was beginning to feel symbolic of the distance growing between them. He made breakfast for both of them, but Lauren was distracted, picking at her food while continuing to work on a drawing that seemed to be frustrating her. The drawing Lauren was working on that morning has since become significant to those trying to understand her state of mind. It showed a figure walking away from a structure, possibly a house, toward what appeared to be an endless horizon. The figure was small in the composition, dwarfed by the landscape, suggesting both freedom and vulnerability. Their conversation over breakfast was stilted, full of the kind of careful politeness that indicates underlying tension. They discussed practical matters, what to do about groceries, whether to extend their stay at the Airbnb, when Lauren might need to return Cody's car that she had been borrowing. Each topic seemed to carry weight beyond its surface meaning. By 10 a.m., the temperature was already climbing toward what would become another day over 110 degrees. The house felt increasingly confining as the heat made outdoor activity impossible. Lauren tried to continue working on her art, but she seemed restless, unable to focus on any single project for very long. Cody suggested they drive somewhere with air conditioning, perhaps visit the Joshua Tree Visitor Center or find a cafe in town. But Lauren declined, saying she wanted to work. In reality, friends later realized, she was probably trying to avoid the kind of extended conversation that being trapped in a car together might have prompted. The morning passed with both of them carefully navigating around each other, like dancers who had forgotten their choreography. Lauren would start to say something, then stop mid-sentence. Cody would begin conversations that faded into silence when Lauren failed to engage with enthusiasm. Around noon, the temperature gauge on their car's dashboard read 115 degrees. Inside the house, even with the air conditioning running constantly, the temperature was climbing. Lauren complained of feeling claustrophobic, trapped by the heat and the small space and the weight of everything they weren't saying to each other. She tried going outside briefly, thinking the fresh air might help her mood, but the heat was so intense it felt dangerous within minutes. Back inside, she seemed more agitated than before, pacing around the small house like a caged animal. The exact details of what happened between Lauren and Cody that afternoon remain disputed, filtered through the lens of trauma and the natural human tendency to remember events in ways that serve our understanding of ourselves. What everyone agrees on is that around 2 p.m., they had some kind of confrontation that changed everything. According to Cody's later statements to police, the argument began over something seemingly minor, perhaps the air conditioning, or plans for dinner, or one of the many small decisions that become magnified when people are living in close quarters under stress. But it quickly escalated into a broader conversation about their relationship and future. Lauren, according to Cody, expressed frustration that felt disproportionate to whatever had triggered the immediate disagreement. She talked about feeling trapped, not just by the heat but by the entire situation. She said she needed space, needed to think, needed to figure out what she was doing with her life. Cody, already anxious about Lauren's emotional distance, apparently responded defensively. He pointed out everything he had done to support her, the patience he had shown, the sacrifices he had made. The conversation took on the bitter tone that arguments between former lovers often carry, mixing genuine grievances with the accumulated resentments of unresolved feelings. What happened next would be debated by investigators, family members, and online observers for years to come. At some point during their argument, Lauren made the decision that would change everything. She announced that she was leaving. Not leaving the house for a few hours to cool off, not leaving Yucca Valley to return to their normal lives, but leaving immediately, on foot, in the middle of the afternoon, in temperatures that were approaching 120 degrees. It was a decision that seemed so irrational, so dangerous, that Cody initially thought she wasn't serious. But Lauren was serious. She began gathering a few personal items, her phone, her wallet, a small water bottle that would prove tragically inadequate for desert conditions. Cody, realizing she was actually planning to walk out into the desert heat, tried to stop her. He offered to drive her wherever she wanted to go, suggested they could talk about alternatives, pleaded with her to wait until evening when the temperature would be safer. Lauren refused all offers of assistance or compromise. She seemed to have reached some kind of breaking point where the only solution she could see was immediate escape, regardless of the practical dangers. Friends who knew her well would later say this was completely out of character. Lauren was usually methodical, careful, someone who planned her moves and considered consequences. At approximately 3 p.m. on June 28, 2021, Lauren Cho walked out of the house on Benmar Trail wearing a yellow tank top, denim shorts, and sneakers. She carried her phone and a small amount of water, but no hat, no sunscreen, no supplies adequate for survival in extreme desert conditions. Cody watched her leave from the doorway, still expecting her to turn around after a few minutes when the heat became unbearable. The temperature at that moment was 117 degrees, hot enough to cause heat exhaustion in healthy adults within 30 minutes of exposure. Lauren walked east from the house, toward the more remote areas of the desert. Neighbors who saw her later described her pace as determined but not panicked, as if she knew where she was going. But no one could imagine where that might be, or how she planned to survive the conditions she was walking into. The last person to see Lauren alive was a neighbor working in his garage who noticed a woman in a yellow shirt walking past around 3:15 p.m. He considered calling out to warn her about the heat, but she seemed focused and purposeful, and he assumed she knew what she was doing. By 4 p.m., Lauren had walked beyond the range of security cameras, beyond the sight of witnesses, into the vast Mojave Desert that stretches for thousands of square miles in every direction. She had walked into a landscape that, for all its beauty, shows no mercy to those unprepared for its challenges. And somewhere in that vastness, Lauren Cho disappeared, leaving behind only questions, grief, and the endless search for answers that continues to this day. Back at the house on Benmar Trail, Cody spent the first hour after Lauren left alternating between anger and worry. He was angry that she had chosen such a dangerous way to make her point, worried about her safety in the extreme heat, and confused about what he should do next. Part of him expected her to return within the hour, humbled by the brutal conditions and ready to have a more reasonable conversation. But as the temperature gauge in their car continued to climb, reaching 119 degrees by 4 p.m., Cody's anger began transforming into genuine fear. He drove slowly through the neighborhood, looking for any sign of Lauren, calling her phone repeatedly and getting no response. The silence on the other end of the line felt ominous in a way that busy signals or even angry hang-ups would not have. By 5 p.m., with the sun still blazing overhead and no sign of Lauren anywhere, Cody began reaching out to her friends and family. These phone calls were awkward. How do you explain that someone you care about has walked into the desert in dangerous conditions after an argument? How do you ask for help finding someone without revealing the complicated dynamics that led to their disappearance? Lauren's friends responded with a mixture of concern and frustration that reflected their long-standing worries about her impulsive tendencies. But even those who had grown accustomed to Lauren's unpredictable choices were alarmed by the circumstances of her disappearance. Walking into the desert in extreme heat wasn't artistic or adventurous, it was potentially suicidal. As the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, Cody made the decision to contact law enforcement. At 6:30 p.m., he called the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department to report Lauren missing. The deputy who took the call immediately understood the urgency. Anyone unprepared in the desert during extreme heat conditions would have very limited time before dehydration and heat exposure became life-threatening. The responding officers arrived at the Benmar Trail house as the temperature was finally beginning to drop below 110 degrees. They questioned Cody extensively about the circumstances of Lauren's departure, the nature of their relationship, and any information that might help predict where she had gone. Cody's account of the afternoon raised immediate red flags for the investigating officers. Domestic disputes were a common factor in missing person cases, and Lauren's decision to leave on foot during dangerous conditions suggested either impaired judgment or desperation to escape an intolerable situation. The officers conducted a preliminary search of the immediate area, checking with neighbors and looking for any signs of where Lauren might have gone. Several residents reported seeing a woman in yellow walking east from Benmar Trail, but the sightings were scattered and sometimes contradictory. In the vast desert landscape, someone on foot could disappear quickly once they moved beyond the developed areas. As darkness finally brought some relief from the heat, search teams assembled for what everyone hoped would be a quick rescue operation. The San Bernardino County Sheriff's Search and Rescue Team, along with local volunteers familiar with desert conditions, began a systematic search of the areas where Lauren was most likely to have sought shelter. The search teams focused on obvious landmarks and shelter points, large rock formations, abandoned structures, areas with natural shade where someone might wait out the extreme heat. They called Lauren's name constantly, hoping she was conscious and able to respond, while dreading the possibility that they might be too late. The desert at night transforms completely from its daytime character. The brutal heat gives way to surprisingly cool temperatures, and sounds carry for miles in the thin, dry air. The search teams could hear each other across vast distances, but they heard nothing from Lauren. Her phone, which had been going straight to voicemail since mid-afternoon, was either turned off or dead. Cell phone coverage in the desert is spotty under the best circumstances, and the search teams couldn't rely on technology to help locate her. By dawn on June 29th, it had been nearly 18 hours since Lauren walked into the desert, and the search teams were facing grim statistical realities. In extreme heat conditions, survival time without adequate water is measured in hours, not days. The first 24 hours would be critical for any hope of finding Lauren alive. The official search expanded dramatically that morning, with helicopters equipped with thermal imaging joining the ground teams. The thermal cameras could detect body heat even when visual searches failed, but they also revealed the challenging nature of desert search operations. The landscape was dotted with warm spots that could be rocks, animals, or debris, each requiring ground verification. Search teams began working in a grid pattern, methodically covering every square mile within a 5-mile radius of the Benmar Trail House. They focused on areas where someone might logically seek shelter, washes where flash floods had carved channels, clusters of Joshua trees that provided minimal shade, abandoned structures left behind by decades of desert dwellers. The desert revealed its own stories during the search. Teams found old campsites, abandoned vehicles, and remnants of other people's attempts to live off the grid. But none of these discoveries brought them closer to finding Lauren. Lauren's family received the call about her disappearance on the evening of June 28, while they were going about their normal routines 3,000 miles away in New Jersey. Her mother was preparing dinner when the phone rang with news that would fundamentally change their understanding of their daughter's life and choices. The conversation with Cody was difficult and confusing. He tried to explain the circumstances of Lauren's disappearance without revealing the full complexity of their relationship dynamics. Her parents struggled to understand how their daughter, someone they knew to be smart and careful, could make such a dangerous decision. Lauren's sister, who had maintained closer contact with her during the nomadic years, was less surprised by the circumstances but equally frightened by the implications. She had worried for months about Lauren's increasingly isolated lifestyle and complicated living situations. Now her worst fears seemed to be materializing. The family made immediate plans to travel to California, booking the first available flights and preparing for what they hoped would be a brief crisis that ended with Lauren's safe recovery. But the logistics of cross-country travel meant they wouldn't arrive until June 30th, precious time lost while Lauren remained missing in brutal conditions. When Lauren's family arrived in Yucca Valley, they were struck by the vastness of the landscape and the apparent impossibility of the search task. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, a moonscape of sand, rock, and sparse vegetation that could hide a person indefinitely. The family established their own command center at a local hotel, creating a base of operations for coordinating with official search teams while conducting their own efforts to locate Lauren. They printed thousands of flyers, contacted local media, and reached out to every person in Lauren's phone who might have information about her plans or state of mind. Lauren's mother struggled to reconcile the daughter she knew with the circumstances of the disappearance. The Lauren she remembered was cautious, methodical, someone who researched destinations thoroughly and always had backup plans. The idea that this same person had walked into the desert unprepared seemed impossible to accept. Her father focused on practical matters, working with search coordinators to understand the terrain and search patterns. He studied maps obsessively, trying to identify areas that might have been overlooked, places where Lauren might have sought shelter or tried to find help. As the search extended into its third day, tensions began developing between Lauren's family and the investigating officers. The family felt that not enough resources were being dedicated to the search, while law enforcement had to balance Lauren's case against other urgent public safety needs. The family also began questioning the focus of the investigation. While search teams continued looking for Lauren in the desert, detectives were spending considerable time interviewing Cody about the circumstances of their relationship and the argument that preceded her disappearance. Lauren's sister became particularly frustrated with what she perceived as an assumption that Lauren's disappearance was somehow connected to domestic violence. While she acknowledged that Lauren and Cody had a complicated relationship, she insisted that Lauren was not someone who would be driven to desperate measures by relationship conflict. The investigating officers tried to explain that understanding the context of Lauren's disappearance was crucial to predicting where she might have gone and what her intentions might have been. But to a family desperate for immediate action, these interviews felt like time wasted while Lauren remained missing. As news of Lauren's disappearance spread through Yucca Valley and the broader high desert community, local residents began organizing their own search efforts. Desert communities understand the particular dangers of their environment and the importance of helping anyone lost in such conditions. Local hiking groups, off-road vehicle clubs, and longtime residents with intimate knowledge of the terrain joined the search efforts. They checked remote areas that official teams might not have prioritized, places where locals knew people sometimes went to camp illegally or seek solitude. The response revealed both the best and most challenging aspects of desert communities. Many residents were genuinely helpful, offering local knowledge and volunteer hours. But others seemed drawn to the drama of a missing person case, creating complications for official search efforts with unauthorized searches and conflicting information. Social media began playing an increasingly important role in coordinating volunteer efforts and sharing information. Lauren's case started attracting attention beyond the local area, drawing amateur investigators and true crime enthusiasts who analyzed every detail and proposed theories about what might have happened. On July 1st, 3 days after Lauren's disappearance, search teams made their first significant discovery. Her phone was found approximately a quarter-mile from the Benmar Trail house, lying in the desert sand with its battery completely drained. The location of the phone provided the first concrete evidence of Lauren's route after leaving the house. She had walked east, as witnesses had reported, but the phone's position suggested she had been moving in a generally straight line rather than wandering aimlessly. Digital forensics teams immediately began analyzing the phone for any clues about Lauren's intentions or communications in the hours before her disappearance. They found that she had attempted to make several calls after leaving the house, but the poor cell coverage in the area meant most hadn't connected successfully. The phone data revealed that Lauren's last successful call had been to a friend in New Mexico around 4:30 p.m. on June 28. The conversation had lasted less than 2 minutes, and the friend later told investigators that Lauren had sounded upset but not panicked. She had mentioned needing to get away from here, but hadn't provided specifics about her plans. The discovery of Lauren's phone allowed search coordinators to refine their efforts, focusing on areas east of where the device was found. The assumption was that Lauren had continued walking in the same direction, possibly seeking help or trying to reach a main road. But the expanded search also revealed the enormity of the task. The desert terrain was more complex than it appeared from a distance, with hidden washes, rocky outcroppings, and countless places where someone could seek shelter or, tragically, where remains could be concealed. Search teams began focusing on natural features that might attract someone seeking shade or water: dry creek beds, large rock formations, abandoned structures. They also checked areas near roads where Lauren might have hoped to flag down help, though the extreme heat would have made extended walking toward any distant road extremely dangerous. Each day of searching revealed more about the desert's ability to hide secrets. Teams found evidence of other people who had passed through the area over the years: old campsites, discarded belongings, even human remains from unrelated cases, but nothing that brought them closer to finding Lauren. As the immediate crisis of Lauren's disappearance settled into the reality of a long-term investigation, detectives began conducting more detailed interviews with everyone who knew Lauren and Cody. These conversations revealed a complex picture of their relationship that went far beyond the simple narrative of an argument leading to someone walking into the desert. Friends described Lauren as someone who had always struggled with conventional relationship expectations. Even in her early 20s, she had shown a pattern of intense connections followed by sudden retreats when situations became too demanding or predictable. Several people mentioned that Lauren seemed to fear being trapped more than she feared being alone. Cody's friends painted a picture of someone who genuinely cared for Lauren but may not have fully understood the depth of her need for independence. They described him as patient and supportive, perhaps to a fault, someone who kept hoping that consistency and kindness would eventually overcome Lauren's reluctance to commit to any stable situation. The age difference between them, nearly a decade, began to seem more significant as investigators learned more about their dynamics. Lauren had already lived through the phase of life where people typically settle into career and relationship patterns. Cody was still in the stage where building stability felt like the natural progression of adulthood. Investigators discovered that Lauren's financial situation had become increasingly precarious in the months before her disappearance. Her artistic work, while personally fulfilling, wasn't generating consistent income, and her nomadic lifestyle made it difficult to maintain steady employment. Bank records showed that Lauren had been living paycheck to paycheck, often overdrawing her account and relying on friends for temporary financial support. The Yucca Valley trip was straining her resources further, and she had been discussing with friends the possibility of returning to New Jersey to regroup financially. Several friends mentioned that Lauren had seemed particularly stressed about money in the weeks before her disappearance. She had been applying for various jobs, both in California and back east, but hadn't committed to any particular path forward. This financial uncertainty may have contributed to her general sense of being trapped in an unsustainable situation. Cody had been covering most of their shared expenses during the desert stay, a situation that made Lauren increasingly uncomfortable. Friends said she had expressed guilt about accepting his support while being unable to offer him the relationship he wanted. Lauren's digital communications in the days before her disappearance provided investigators with insights into her state of mind that weren't immediately apparent to those around her. Text messages and social media posts revealed someone who was struggling with decision-making and seemed to be seeking validation for choices she was considering. Her search history showed inquiries about transportation options, bus routes, rideshare availability, even information about hitchhiking safety. These searches suggested she had been planning some kind of departure from Yucca Valley, though whether she intended to leave alone or with Cody remained unclear. Perhaps most significantly, investigators found that Lauren had been researching desert survival techniques in the weeks before her disappearance. She had looked up information about finding water, navigating by landmarks, and dealing with extreme heat conditions. This discovery complicated the narrative of someone making an impulsive decision to walk into dangerous conditions. However, the survival research was basic and incomplete, more like someone curious about a topic than someone preparing for a serious desert expedition. Lauren had not researched the specific terrain around Yucca Valley or identified resources that might be available in the immediate area. As the investigation broadened, detectives interviewed dozens of people who had seen Lauren during her final weeks in California. These conversations revealed someone who seemed to be searching for something she couldn't quite articulate, even to herself. A waitress at a diner in Yucca Valley remembered Lauren coming in alone several times during their stay, always ordering coffee and spending hours writing in a notebook. She described Lauren as friendly but preoccupied, someone who seemed to be working through complex thoughts or emotions. The owner of a local art supply store recalled Lauren purchasing materials for desert landscape painting, expressing enthusiasm about capturing the unique light and color of the high desert environment. This conversation had taken place just days before her disappearance, suggesting that at least part of her was planning to continue her artistic work in the area. Several neighbors reported seeing Lauren taking long walks in the early morning hours, always alone, following routes that took her progressively farther from the developed areas of town. These walks appeared to be increasing in frequency and distance in the days before June 28. The woman who owned the house on Benmar Trail provided investigators with unique insights into Lauren and Cody's relationship dynamics during their stay. As someone who lived nearby and had rented to many couples over the years, she had developed an intuitive sense for relationships under stress. She described noticing tension between Lauren and Cody that seemed to be increasing rather than decreasing during their time in the desert. They had been friendly and polite during their first week, but by mid-June, she observed less conversation between them and more time spent in separate activities. The host mentioned that Lauren had asked her about hiking trails and local landmarks several times, expressing particular interest in areas that were off the beaten path. Lauren had also inquired about long-term rental possibilities in the area, though she hadn't followed up on any specific options. Most significantly, the host recalled that on the morning of June 28, she had seen Lauren outside early, taking photographs of the sunrise. Lauren had appeared calm and focused, not like someone on the verge of making a desperate decision. This observation would later fuel speculation about Lauren's actual intentions when she left the house. As investigators compiled information about Lauren's background, personality, and recent behavior, a psychological profile began emerging that helped explain some aspects of her disappearance while raising new questions about others. Mental health professionals consulted on the case described Lauren as fitting a pattern common among creative individuals, highly sensitive to environmental and emotional stimuli, prone to intense but brief enthusiasms, and likely to feel overwhelmed by situations that others might find merely challenging. Her nomadic lifestyle and pattern of intense relationships followed by sudden departures suggested someone who struggled with long-term commitment and conventional stability. However, this pattern had previously involved carefully planned transitions, not impulsive decisions that put her physical safety at risk. The decision to walk into the desert during extreme heat seemed fundamentally inconsistent with Lauren's usual approach to challenges. Even her most impulsive choices had generally included basic safety considerations and backup plans. The June 28 decision appeared to represent either a significant deterioration in her judgment or circumstances that felt so intolerable that physical danger seemed preferable to staying. As the search for Lauren extended into its second week without any trace of her remains, some investigators began considering the possibility that her disappearance had been planned rather than impulsive. This theory suggested that Lauren had used the argument with Cody as cover for executing a predetermined plan to disappear and start fresh elsewhere. Proponents of this theory pointed to several factors: Lauren's research into transportation options, her inquiries about long-term housing, and her general pattern of making dramatic life changes when situations became uncomfortable. They suggested she might have arranged for someone to pick her up in a predetermined location beyond the range of security cameras. The voluntary disappearance theory gained some credibility when investigators discovered that Lauren had been in contact with several people in the days before her disappearance who weren't well known to her family or close friends. These contacts included individuals she had met during her travels who might have been willing to help her start over without questions. However, this theory faced significant challenges. Lauren's family insisted she would never put them through the agony of not knowing her fate. Her financial situation was too precarious to support starting over somewhere else without help. And the extreme heat conditions on June 28 made any planned outdoor rendezvous extremely dangerous. The most widely accepted theory among law enforcement was that Lauren had succumbed to heat-related illness while attempting to walk to safety or help. With temperatures exceeding 115 degrees and inadequate water supplies, heat exhaustion could have incapacitated her within hours of leaving the house. This theory was supported by medical experts who explained that heat stroke can cause confusion and poor decision-making, potentially leading someone to make increasingly dangerous choices. Lauren might have initially intended to walk to a specific destination but become disoriented as dehydration affected her judgment. The vast desert landscape around Yucca Valley offered countless places where someone could collapse and remain hidden indefinitely. Flash flood channels, rocky outcroppings, and dense vegetation areas could conceal remains even from extensive search efforts using helicopters and ground teams. However, the accidental death theory raised questions about why such extensive search efforts had failed to locate Lauren's remains. The search teams included experienced desert rescue specialists who understood the terrain and the patterns of how people typically move when lost or distressed. Some investigators and observers theorized that Lauren might have encountered someone else in the desert, either by chance or by arrangement, leading to foul play. The remote areas around Yucca Valley had seen criminal activity in the past, and someone walking alone would have been vulnerable to predators. This theory gained some support from the fact that Lauren's phone was found relatively close to the house, suggesting she might not have traveled as far on foot as initially assumed. If someone had picked her up, either willingly or by force, they could have discarded her phone to prevent tracking while taking her much farther from the search area. Investigators looked into several individuals who had been in the area around the time of Lauren's disappearance, including people with criminal backgrounds who might have posed a threat. However, none of these investigations yielded concrete evidence linking anyone to Lauren's disappearance. The third-party involvement theory was complicated by the lack of physical evidence suggesting struggle or violence. Lauren's phone showed no signs of damage, and there were no reports of suspicious vehicles or individuals in the area during the relevant time period. A variation of the third-party involvement theory suggested that Lauren might have arranged to meet someone in the desert, explaining why she walked away from the house without adequate supplies for a long journey. This person could have been offering her help, transportation, or simply a conversation away from Cody's presence. This theory was supported by Lauren's pattern of maintaining connections with people she had met during her travels, some of whom her family didn't know well. Cell phone records showed communications with several individuals in the weeks before her disappearance, though none admitted to having plans to meet Lauren on June 28. The planned meeting theory would explain why Lauren seemed to be walking with purpose rather than wandering aimlessly, as several witnesses had observed. It would also explain why she didn't seem panicked or distressed during her final sightings. She might have believed she was walking toward help rather than into danger. However, this theory required assuming that whoever Lauren planned to meet had either harmed her or failed to show up, leaving her stranded in dangerous conditions. Neither possibility could be proven with available evidence. For months after Lauren's disappearance, in October 2021, searchers made a discovery that briefly raised hopes while ultimately deepening the mystery. Human remains were found in the desert approximately 3 miles from where Lauren was last seen, in an area that had been searched multiple times during the initial intensive efforts. Lauren's family rushed to the scene, their hearts torn between hope for closure and fear of confirmation of their worst fears. The remains were in an advanced state of decomposition, making immediate identification impossible, but the location and circumstances seemed consistent with someone who had died from exposure in the desert heat. For several agonizing days, the family waited for forensic analysis that would determine whether the remains belonged to Lauren. The discovery had renewed media attention on the case and brought both support and unwanted scrutiny from the public. However, when the forensic results came back, they revealed that the remains belonged to someone else entirely, another person who had died in the desert under circumstances that remained mysterious. The discovery brought closure to one family while leaving Lauren's loved ones still searching for answers. Despite the disappointment of the October discovery, Lauren's family refused to give up hope. They organized periodic search efforts, coordinating with volunteer groups and utilizing new technologies as they became available. These ongoing searches revealed the dynamic nature of desert landscapes. Areas that had been thoroughly searched in July looked completely different by October, as seasonal weather patterns shifted sand and debris, potentially revealing or concealing evidence that had been hidden earlier. The family also worked to keep Lauren's case in the public consciousness, participating in true crime podcasts and television shows that might generate new leads. They maintained social media accounts dedicated to the search, sharing updates and appealing for information from anyone who might have knowledge about Lauren's fate. Technology continued to evolve, offering new possibilities for solving cold cases. Improved satellite imagery allowed investigators to examine historical photos of the search area, looking for any anomalies that might have been missed. Advanced DNA analysis techniques offered hope that even degraded evidence might eventually yield answers. The ongoing uncertainty took a devastating toll on Lauren's family and friends. They existed in a liminal space between hope and grief, unable to fully mourn while unable to stop searching. The ambiguous loss, a term psychologists use to describe situations where someone is physically absent but psychologically present, created unique challenges for healing. Lauren's mother struggled with guilt about not recognizing signs of her daughter's distress, despite the fact that Lauren had been an adult living independently for years. Her father channeled his energy into practical search efforts, becoming an expert on desert survival and search techniques while trying to maintain hope that his expertise might someday bring Lauren home. Friends dealt with their own complicated emotions, grief mixed with frustration about Lauren's choices, love combined with anger about the situation she had created. Some found it difficult to maintain hope as months turned into years without any trace of her. The family sought support from organizations that specialize in helping families of missing persons, learning about the unique challenges of ambiguous loss and developing strategies for maintaining hope while accepting uncertainty. The extended search for Lauren revealed both the strengths and limitations of desert communities. Many residents continued to keep an eye out for any signs of her, checking remote areas during their own outdoor activities and reporting anything unusual to authorities. Local businesses displayed Lauren's photograph for years after her disappearance, and hiking groups incorporated awareness of her case into their safety briefings. The desert community understood, perhaps better than outsiders, how easy it was for someone to vanish in such vast and unforgiving terrain. However, the prolonged search also created tensions within the community. Some residents grew weary of the ongoing attention and speculation, feeling that their area was being unfairly characterized as dangerous. Others worried that the focus on Lauren's case might overshadow other missing persons who had received less attention. The case highlighted broader issues about resource allocation in missing person investigations, particularly the phenomenon known as missing white woman syndrome, where cases involving young, attractive white women receive disproportionate media coverage compared to missing persons of color or from marginalized communities. As we near the end of Lauren's story, it's important to remember that behind every true crime case are real people whose lives have been forever altered by tragedy. Lauren's disappearance created ripple effects that extended far beyond her immediate family, touching everyone who knew her and many who only knew her story. Cody, the last person to see Lauren alive, carries a burden that few can understand. Whatever the nature of their final argument, it's unlikely he expected it to end with such devastating consequences. He has largely stayed out of the public eye since Lauren's disappearance, but those close to him describe someone struggling with guilt, confusion, and the weight of unanswered questions. Lauren's friends have had to reconcile their memories of someone vibrant and alive with the reality of her mysterious fate. They carry forward her artistic legacy while grappling with questions about whether they missed signs of distress or could have done something differently. The case has also affected the broader community of artists and travelers who identified with Lauren's lifestyle choices. Her disappearance serves as a reminder of the risks that can accompany freedom and the importance of maintaining connections with people who can provide support during difficult times. Lauren's case has contributed to increased awareness about desert safety, particularly among people drawn to remote areas for artistic or spiritual purposes. Desert communities have expanded their educational efforts about heat safety, proper preparation for outdoor activities, and the resources available for people in crisis. Search and rescue organizations have used Lauren's case as a training example, analyzing the challenges of searching vast desert terrain and developing improved strategies for similar future cases. Her disappearance highlighted the importance of rapid response in extreme heat conditions and the value of community involvement in search efforts. The case also underscored the particular vulnerabilities faced by people, especially women, in remote areas. Desert communities have worked to develop better support systems for temporary residents and visitors who might find themselves in difficult situations far from their usual support networks. Mental health resources in rural areas have received increased attention partly due to cases like Lauren's, with recognition that isolation and stress can create dangerous situations for people who might otherwise make different choices. Lauren's story raises profound questions about freedom, responsibility, and the choices we make when faced with difficult circumstances. Her artistic work, which focused on themes of transience and the beauty found in temporary situations, seems almost prophetic in light of her disappearance. Some who knew Lauren believe that her fate, whatever it was, represented a kind of continuation of her artistic philosophy, a complete embrace of impermanence and uncertainty. Others see her disappearance as a tragedy that cut short a life full of unrealized potential. The desert that claimed Lauren continues to inspire and challenge those who seek its solitude. Her case has become part of the larger mythology of the American West, where the promise of freedom and self-determination exists alongside the ever-present possibility of loss and mystery. For those who continue to search for Lauren, both literally and figuratively, her story represents hope that mysteries can eventually be solved and that love can persist even in the face of uncertainty. The desert keeps its secrets, but human determination and advancing technology offer continuing possibilities for answers. Tonight, as our story draws to a close and the rain continues its gentle rhythm, Lauren Cho remains one of the desert's mysteries. Somewhere in the vast expanse of the Mojave, answers wait to be discovered, truth lies buried beneath sand and time. Her case reminds us of the fragility of life and the importance of the connections that anchor us to safety and love. In our interconnected, surveilled, mapped world, it seems impossible that people can simply vanish without explanation. Yet they do, reminding us that mystery still exists in the margins of modern life. Lauren's story is more than a cautionary tale or an unsolved mystery. It's a reminder that every person who disappears is someone's daughter, someone's friend, someone whose absence leaves an unfillable void in the lives of those who loved them. Her artistic work continues to speak to people who discover it, a testament to a creative spirit that refused to be contained by conventional boundaries. For those who knew and loved Lauren, she was more than a true crime case or a desert mystery. She was an artist with dreams that stretched as wide as the sky, a friend whose laugh could brighten the darkest day, a daughter whose memory continues to inspire searches for truth and understanding. Even today, volunteers occasionally organize informal searches in the areas around Yucca Valley, hoping to find some trace of Lauren or closure for her family. The desert landscape changes constantly, flash floods reshape channels, wind shifts sand, seasons bring new growth that might reveal what was previously hidden. Technology continues to advance, offering new tools for solving cold cases. Satellite imagery becomes more detailed, DNA analysis grows more sophisticated, artificial intelligence applications in search and rescue provide hope that cases like Lauren's might eventually find resolution. Lauren's family has established a foundation in her memory, supporting other families of missing persons and advocating for improved search and rescue resources in remote communities. They continue to believe that someone, somewhere, knows what happened on that scorching afternoon in June 2021. Their love for Lauren transcends the mystery of her disappearance, creating something positive from tragedy and ensuring that her story continues not because of unanswered questions, but because of the human connections that refuse to let her be forgotten. As you prepare for sleep tonight, perhaps spare a thought for Lauren and the thousands of others who have vanished without explanation. Their stories remind us to cherish the people in our lives, to reach out when we're struggling, and to remember that sometimes the most adventurous choice is simply staying connected to those who love us. The desert that claimed Lauren continues to draw seekers and dreamers, artists and wanderers who find something in its vastness that they can't find anywhere else. May they travel safely, may they find what they're searching for, and may they remember that even in the most remote places, they are not truly alone as long as someone knows where they are and when to expect them home. Sweet dreams, and may your rest be peaceful. Tomorrow brings new possibilities for answers, for closure, for hope. The desert keeps its secrets, but not forever. Time reveals all truths eventually, and love persists beyond understanding. Until all the missing are found, we keep searching, we keep hoping, and we keep telling their stories with the dignity and care they deserve. Thank you for listening to tonight's true crime story. Rest peacefully, knowing that another story awaits you next time, ready to accompany you on another journey toward restorative sleep. But if you're still awake, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss our next true crime stories. And until next time, stay safe and take care. Good night.